From where you're kneeling, this must seem like an 18-karat run of bad luck. Truth is, these scientists behind me are about to send you into the future, into one of the wastelands. They need you to record your experience, so you've been hooked up with all sorts of cybernetics that are going to record your experience and send it back to them, whether you're dead or alive. But obviously, the information will be more useful if you're alive, so they've contracted NV Ranger & Co. to guide you. We're going to look at southern New California, northern New California, the Mojave, the Belt, also known as the Midwest Wasteland, the Capital Wasteland, and the Commonwealth, which is also probably a wasteland. We'll get to that other one I know you're curious about towards the end. We're going to rank each wasteland in a set of categories. The rank the wasteland receives in that category will be the number of points it gets. So the less points a wasteland has by the end, the better it is to live in, and the more points a wasteland has by the end, the worse it is. Category 1, Raiders and Wildlife. Look, Southern New California is kind of a walk in the park compared to the rest, to be honest. Truth is, civilization is primitive, and so are the outside threats. We have a recurring gang on the West Coast known as the Cons. We'll see them again and again. They're pretty small scale in Southern New California, though. You might run into some thugs around the city ruins, and if you see one of these things, briskly walk in the other direction. Deathclaws are here, but in a limited capacity, largely found in a specific spot in the boneyard that is the remnants of Los Angeles. They're close to the gun runners. Then you have wasteland usuals like rad scorpions and mutant rodents. You also have some big ol' stinky regular rats. Unpleasant, but they ain't no Wanamingos. They are all over the place, though. There are so many rats. Northern New California is only one rank below South NC, but it's an enormous drop-off. Civilization has developed, but so has the raider and wildlife situation. Geckos are the new rats, and they're a little bigger than the ones you might be used to. Some even breathe fire. Then you have this thing, a Wanamingo. Looks like a xenomorph had sex with Mike Wazowski. We don't even really know what it is. A cryptid, an alien, a mutant, a genetically engineered monster. Who knows? Who cares? Just stay away. You can run into those guys in the wild and also stay the hell away from the Redding mine. The previous cons were wiped out, and now they're back. The son of the previous leader hid while the tribe got killed. The coward. I think he was a child, but now he's back and he's recreating the cons as the new cons. But he mostly just hired a bunch of mercenaries to play pretend for him. Not the best base for a raider tribe. They gotta believe in the cause, you know? In some ways, they're more of an issue, and in other ways, they're a shell of themselves. They lack inspiration. Then you have institutions of slavery in the north, very prominent in a town known as the Den. Keep that in mind as a newcomer with few ties or relationships, your easy prey. We also have to mention the mafia running New Reno. They're not raiders, maybe closer to wildlife, but they're an example of how crime is developing along with civilization. The truth is, any of these wastelands could be dead last depending on where you're standing in each of them, including the Mojave. The fiends are a walking nightmare. These guys are cracked out raiders armed to the teeth with energy weapons that plague the majority of West Vegas. They breed like rats, and the only requirement for joining them is an unhealthy interest in needles. They make other gangs in the region look weak. Speaking of which, the cons are back in the form of the Great Cons. And as pathetic as they are relative to the world of the Mojave, this is likely the strongest they have ever been. That was probably before Bitter Springs, but they're stronger than the previous two at least. Powder gangers dust the I-15 armed with explosives and maintain multiple strongholds, and they have internal factions. Then you have Vipers and Jackals at the very bottom of the Raider food chain. We couldn't do this without Deathclaws. Of course, they're back, and they have a couple of large packs in the region. Geckos are all over, still breathing fire. And then you have Cazadores. 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 The reality holding the Mojave up from the bottom is the predictable placement of these threats. If you don't go where they are, your chances of not getting killed by them are much higher. And it's generally possible to avoid them or limit exposure. Just talk to some locals, get a lay of the land. It might be surprising to see the Capital Wasteland this high, but I'll explain. Raiders and super mutants cover the place. It's absolute chaos everywhere you go. No one's denying that. Running into a super mutant behemoth is basically a kaiju level issue. Ghouls fill the metro tunnels, which you need to fully navigate DC. However, wildlife, while sporadic and less predictable than the Mojave, is often less concentrated, especially out in the rural areas. Sure, you'll find a stray Deathclaw or a Yaoguai here and there, Whoop-de-doo. It is a huge issue, but not as relevant as a pack of Deathclaws or a swarm of Cazadors. Just don't go to Old Olney. Ever. Don't go there. Still, it has to go below the Mojave because the total density and chaos consuming the region is hard to match. You have an enormous institution of slavery in Paradise Falls. These are basically raiders who kidnap travelers and townsfolk more than they brush their teeth. To be honest, I don't think anybody in the capital Wasteland brushes their teeth. This place is bad, but it gets worse. Starting with the Commonwealth in 5th, which is a very similar cesspool. We have the usual raider of the East Coast, but then there are far more heavily armed and organized raiders that go by the Gunners. These guys are a major reason this region is this low. The Commonwealth had something of a government forming under the Minutemen in Quincy.
Hey, you say it Quincy. Quincy, like it had a Z. It has a C, but say it like it has a Z.
Then the Gunners massacred them and took over the settlement for themselves. The important point to this is the Gunners aren't fighting over rubble in the same way most raiders do. They're taking relevant towns and infrastructure. The Institute might be the clear regional threat, but the Gunners help this place from ever becoming stable. It's relatively similar to the capital still, with super mutants making a return as big, green, raider-like stand-ins, but now they have dogs and occasionally get explosive. Behemoths are back. Looks like they're coming off cycle compared to the capitals, but they throw a mean rock. Mostly everything else just gets bigger and or badder. Deathclaws are mini Godzillas now, and they come in a variety of Mountain Dew flavors. Think Mirelurks were tough? Try a Mirelurk Queen. This place is essentially the capital on steroids, so it must go lower. But it just isn't as bad as the Belt. And no, I'm not talking about the one your stepdad used. Raiders here are more similar to those out west, organized, except they aren't just pests buzzing in your ear while you try and deal with the regional threat. The Gunners can't even really compare. These guys also take over entire towns. The region is forced into accepting Brotherhood rule because without them, the Raiders will just consume the region. This isn't a wasteland where people are saying stuff like, I think the NCR should govern us, or I think Vegas should be independent, or at least the Legion will make the roads safe. It's a wasteland where people are overjoyed just to see anyone capable come through and challenge the Raiders. They are so present and structured here that there's essentially just an alternative hostile society running the Midwest. We don't see Raiders at this scale in any other wasteland, plain and simple. Then you have the variety they come in. Reavers are tech-obsessed, kind of like the Brotherhood. Then you have the Beast Lords, a tribe that can psychically control wildlife. Yeah, they're also cannibals. Maybe they don't identify as humans anymore, so maybe it's not cannibalism to them. You have a lot of the standard creatures as well, but this time the Deathclaws are hairy. And they talk.
Have you come to kill me? Allow a mother's vengeance. Free me and I will bathe in their leader's blood and feast on his hot, quivering flesh. I will suck the marrow from your bones!
That hair helps them stay warm in the cold climate, which is our next category. I know you have some talking Deathclaws in northern New California and Vault 13, but we're not going to call them wildlife. That's disrespectful. They're chill. Shout out to Gorus. Climate. Despite being in a constant state of green, the capital Wasteland is the most forgiving when it comes to climate. DC has hot and humid summers, no doubt. It can have an unpleasant winter too, but when we start looking at the other regions, you'll get the idea here. There are a lot of things trying to kill you in the capital, but the weather isn't at the top of that list. We see a lot of overcast and gloom, and people have mentioned rainfall at least, though the region does experience droughts. That's not unique, and we'll get to food and water in a separate category. In second place is northern New California. Yes, there is a drought at the start, but this is a large region with a lot of varied climates. You're not forced into a single pocket of exposure. Choosing this setting would start you in July of 2241. The big point there is July, the hottest month, especially in this region. A drought at the worst point in the year doesn't necessarily mean you're creeping up on the end times. The Enclave might have something to say about that, but the region is also varied, including a part of southern Oregon, northern Nevada, and the largest chunk being, of course, in northern California. It's harsh, but a mix of coastal areas, mountains, and desert. You have choices, options. You can migrate and move about to get away from the harshest bits of climate. For a similar reason, southern New California lands in third. It gives you less options when it comes to climate. To oversimplify it, Inland is dominated by the Mojave Desert. That's bad. The idea that the Vault Dweller is just gonna wander off into the desert in search of a water chip is hilarious. There's a good chance that Shady Sands, the Master, and his army is just one heat exhaustion fueled hallucination. This is really what happens to the Vault Dweller. I would hope the coastal regions could help balance things out for you, but much of this area has also been turned into desert. The best bet is the temperature is more forgiving near Los Angeles than it is in Death Valley, and the ocean breeze isn't going to blow in too much radiation. That slight bit of nuance and hoping that a little bit of Southern California temperature is intact is what keeps it in third place for climate. Don't get me wrong, all of these places are terrible. I don't think nuclear war was supposed to improve them, but it's just a matter of which is worse. The Commonwealth is going to be relatively similar to the capital Wasteland, but it finds its way much lower on the list. For one, winter is worse here. It gets colder. Every winter that passes is another trial to survive in a world with limited heating, and it will also crush crop production. We know that in 2286, shortly before you get there, the Commonwealth went through a brutal nuclear whiteout winter that put the people of the Commonwealth through hell. Beyond that, you're going to have a lot of rad storms and other unpredictable, brutal weather patterns coming from the glowing sea. We might not see weather like this near New Vegas, but the Mojave is no joke. Some people might overlook this aspect of life here, but I have a good feeling the nuclear apocalypse didn't make it more hospitable, even if fewer bombs made direct contact with Las Vegas. Let me help paint a picture for what you're getting into in this region. The Southern Nevada Health District states that there were over 500 heat-associated deaths in 2024. Thousands of emergency department visits were attributed to heat-related issues. Now the question is, what the hell happens in a world with limited AC and almost no hospitals? Just think about that for a second. In modern times, with air conditioning and ready access to water and electrolytes, hundreds of people a year are dying to heat near Las Vegas. It's one of the hottest and driest cities in the US. You can't just go jingle jangle in your spurs all willy-nilly. Staying hydrated and out of the sun isn't optional if you prefer life. There's another issue. Not sure how relevant it's going to be, but there is a monsoon season, and when it rains, it floods, generally. Modern infrastructure can help with this, but if that's not maintained, you have real problems. I know it sounds strange. You might think, it's the desert. Why would it flood? Put simply, hot, crusty ground can't absorb water, so surface, it stays. The only place clearly worse than this is the belt. Heat might be tough, and winters might be rough, but mile-wide radioactive tornadoes, thunderstorms that rip Brotherhood convoys out of the air, and extreme climate volatility puts this region in dead last. Emphasis on dead. It's important to note that the belt is the largest region we have to consider, stretching from Chicago all the way to the Rocky Mountains in Colorado. It's been referred to as a radioactive dust bowl. Another reason the climate here is so bad to me is because the other wastelands have some defining attribute to live around. The Commonwealth and Capital Wasteland will have winters, but you know they're coming and can prepare for them. Out west, you have tough summers, but again, you know they're coming and can prep. The belt has it all. Each season is going to be a violent whip into another volatile climate. Also, the brutal winters are likely, no, they're not, it's not likely. The winters here are much worse than Boston's, and the Capital Wastelands, of course. No wasteland is perfect. We're talking about wastelands, but the belt has the most extreme and unpredictable climate. It must go in last. The climate is going to have an impact on food and water, so let's move on to that category. The Commonwealth is just dominant here. It's absurd. They have potable water and edible food all over the place like it's one giant feast. It's a shitty feast, but a feast. There are tons of farms and wildlife to hunt, like rad stags, domestic Brahmin as well. Perhaps because the main issue with the Capital Wasteland was an extreme lack of drinkable water. Foreshadowing, the script was flipped, and now you can shove any rusty pipe into the ground and get some fresh H2O. I'm putting the Mojave in second here. It has fresh water sources in Lake Mead and Lake Las Vegas, and there is infrastructure built around these sources to actually gather it. The problem holding it back is it's controlled by various factions in the region, and you can't just snap your fingers and make it appear in an instant. The environment is working against you here. If you aren't getting a steady stream of water and staying cool, You get the point. So despite society having a solid grasp on the bare essentials, control of those resources and the demand for them keep this in second place. You also have Good Springs Source, which is relevant to the potential success of this rural town. The Strip will obviously have plenty of food and water, but you have to afford access to the Strip to even have access to buying that food and water. Freeside has some as well, but the Kings have significant control over the public pump. Similar situation with the NCR and their sharing of resources. Are you a citizen? Great. If not, tough luck. The relevant aspect helping out the Mojave is access is available. The downside is you have to pay for it. All things considered, that's how our world works anyway. In third place is Northern New California. They're going through a drought, so that has to have an impact on food and water, obviously, yet this wasteland is getting that farming and water thing down much better than most other places. It's not that civilization doesn't necessarily struggle a bit with the bare essentials, but they're also beginning to move well beyond that. This is earlier in the timeline than when you'd be sent to New Vegas, but it's also a region that is developing earlier and will go on to far exceed what New Vegas is by 2281 in this regard. So despite the current drought, their ability and willingness to produce is arguably unmatched. Southern New California has to be below the North in fourth place because it's in a more arid region and is far less developed, given you'll be sent there about 100 years earlier in the timeline.
What's this idiot talking about? It's 80 years, not 100.
However, in many ways, this is the foundation of the functional world. While the region lacks in raw resources and soil compared to others, the people are actually working towards production and acquisition of food and water successfully. In the hub, you have water merchants, which means they have enough excess to go around selling it to people. And that counts more than a region that has the resources but isn't capable or for whatever reason willing to use them. Surprise, surprise, the belt is in a bad state. Again, no two ways about it. The region is going to require the technological assistance of the Brotherhood to rebuild the nation's breadbasket and bring the soil back to a more useful condition, but they have to deal with the regional threats and gain more control before they can actually do that. The nuclear war did a number on these fools, and it's not naturally capable of supporting a sizable population with enough food and water. You'll have to endure a very difficult period before entering potentially the best situation. Just be glad you don't have to endure last place, the capital Wasteland, which has people lying all over the place, begging for clean water, and if you try and give them some irradiated liquid, they'll turn it down. The water is so bad here, beggars literally have to be choosers. There is an extraordinary lack of farming here. We even have groups of DIY vampires and cannibals. There is immense suffering, and a core element of that has to do with the food and water situation. There are efforts to purify the water, and they do come to fruition with incredible results. I'm not saying they don't. The capital Wasteland eventually becomes known for its pure water. The aspect holding it below the belt is that there's nothing clearly indicating that distribution, farming, and food supply is suddenly going to wildly improve and help out the larger region. It just deeply lacks infrastructure and governance. There's just about nothing of a society here, with disconnected city-states and towns. Sure, caravans walk between them, kinda, but it's not the same as other wastes with large overarching governments like an NCR territory or aggressive abundance like in the Commonwealth. Speaking of, this brings us to our next category, settlement and economy. I know some of you in the Co are going to assume the Mojave is top dog here, and while the broader wasteland may be in a more developed state by 2281, the Mojave specifically is not nearly as developed as northern New California was in 2241, 40 years earlier. Shady Sands has developed into the new California Republic under President Tandy. To explain briefly, there is a bit of overlap between northern New California and southern New California, surprise, surprise, and Shady Sands sits in that overlap. Depending on which wasteland you go to, you could see this same location 80 years apart. That time made a big difference. Large settlements like Vault City, San Francisco, and New Reno, along with a mining town like Redding, show this world is well beyond the early years of post-apocalyptic survival. Northern NC wins this category, running away. Fight me on it. Go for it. The Mojave is definitely in second place, though. By this point, California is exceedingly developed, and the Mojave is the NCR's next project they plan to annex. Along with Mr. House's recent efforts, the region is incredibly rough, but it has very advanced actors helping prop it up at a pace those living there can barely keep up with. You can see the growing pains in real time where you have a location like the Strip right next to West Vegas Fiend territory. Towns have connections, but the region is still so wrought with issues that those connections become exposed veins to stab at. Still, none of the following wastelands really come close to what this region is, nor what it will soon become if House or the NCR get their way. Third place was kind of a contentious one for me. Southern New California is the quality to the Commonwealth's quantity. There are more settlements near Boston, but they're deeply fragmented. How much should we really factor in the benefits of a couple of dirt balls in the middle of nowhere? I'm looking at you, 10 Pines Bluff, and most of these so-called settlements. Diamond City is relevant, but what's its relationship to the rest of the region? Bunker Hill doesn't seem to be quite the hub that the hub is in Southern New California. The Commonwealth also has Vault 81, which is starting to become a relevant trade partner with the outside. There's Good Neighbor, Covenant, and all of the smaller agricultural spots, which we can't call towns because they're nowhere close. They're just waiting on some absent father to show up and help rebuild everything, I guess. Southern NC has Junktown, Shady Sands, Adetum, and Necropolis. It's better connected, and we have the benefit of knowing it will form into something much greater. But I think it's still too primitive of a state to quite amount to the Commonwealth. South NC has a better economic foundation, no doubt, but less places to actually live, and it is much further spread out. Some of you in the Co are going to think Southern NC is set much earlier than the Commonwealth for this scenario, yet it's much more developed in many ways. It should win. Here's why it doesn't. The Commonwealth is a much more densely settled region. Your options for places to live, trade, work, and so on are all much more available to you. Commonwealth goes into third. Southern New California gets fourth. The Capital Wasteland lands cleanly in fifth because as shit as it is, it just isn't as bad as the Belt. It's similar to the Commonwealth in that it has quite a few towns and settlements, but they're severely broken apart and isolated, even more so. The Belt has to go lower because the few settlements it has are often occupied by raider factions or under immense pressure from them or super mutants. Sure, you have spots like Big Town in the capital that share that quality, but you also have Rivet City and a Megaton that don't exactly deal with that same kind of struggle, surely not to that scale. Similar to Southern New California, the Belt's settlements are few and far between. Remember, this is an enormous region, so to maintain some sort of network, it needs quantity. Otherwise, you're left with a few isolated spots that make the capital look like a tight-knit community. Towns like Quincy and Coldwater are legitimate, but incredibly far apart. Many of the towns have been wiped out and destroyed. St. Louis, Kansas City, Jefferson are all largely under super mutant control. The point to focus on here is the Belt is actively being cleaned up by the Brotherhood so that civilization even has a fighting chance to start, whereas the capital is in the midst of fighting to stay alive. The Belt must go in last. Speaking of space between settlements, this brings us to roadways and travel. The Mojave is top dog here, first place. It has a great road setup. There are currently a lot of problems on those roads, so depending on where you're starting and where you're going, your literal mileage may vary. Nonetheless, the infrastructure and relevant forces are there, and the roads are tied to military, trade, and civilian movement. You can actually use the roads to guide you to worthwhile locations here more than any other wasteland. Reluctantly, in second place is the Commonwealth. The roads will take you places. However, not only do they have many dangers along them, they also don't have much consistency to where they take you in regard to relevant wasteland settlements. None of the Commonwealth locals seem to understand the roads. There's no structure, and the enormous overpass highways might act as cover from rain in one moment and begin raining down bullets in the next. It's too much chaos. There's not simple structure to follow. You likely just end up dead following these roads, but everything after the Mojave just gets worse and worse. The capital is very similar, but has to go below because once you enter the urban section of DC, the roads become entirely useless as a result of the rubble covering them. This is the only wasteland with travel relevant to the metros, and that's definitely not a good thing. Public transit in the US has somehow gotten even worse, if you can believe it. All right, so candidly, without breaking the fourth wall too much, the remaining wastes just don't display or use roads in the same way. I'm taking what we're given into account more than what we may or may not infer. Unfortunately, these wastes require a lot more inference at times. We know Northern California has the most trade going on, so we'll give it the benefit of the doubt and put it into fourth. Northern and Southern New California are going to struggle here in a way that kind of seems unfair, but we gotta stick to the categories and judging things accurately. We have to go off of what we see, and what we see are roads in settlements, but when you travel between them, it seems that sand or the war has covered them up and destroyed them. Beyond that though, even at the edge of settlements, like here at the hub, as we begin to leave it, you can see the road begins to dissipate. I know that's in Southern New California, but a lot of these points are going to apply to both locations. Back in Northern New California, every time you leave a settlement, there's a solid chance you run into a squad of iron giants trying to turn you into a goo pile. It's more difficult to predict or work around what you're going to encounter. The region is so spread out that the roads between are enormous gaps where you become prey. The same is of course true in Southern New California, where even if there was a road between, say, the hub and the boneyard for us to walk along, that's an unreal trek through the wasteland. The hub is the remnants of Barstow, California, so you're talking roughly 100 miles to get to Los Angeles. If there's even a 5-mile gap on that trek where the road disappears and you start walking in the wrong direction and get lost in the desert, this is a death sentence. Then, of course, the lack of assumed maintenance or even existence of roadway across the Midwest's heavily bombed wastes leaves it reliably in last place. You can find a bit more road out in the wastes here, but it's also a lot more spread out. And good Lord, are you constantly getting attacked in between what is largely just raider settlements. You're fighting raiders and wildlife across hundreds of miles to get to more raiders and wildlife. Factions and regional threats, our next category, and an interesting one, perhaps one of the more debatable ones as well, but I think you'll get my thought process as we proceed. The Mojave is going to get first place here. The reason being is counterbalance. The Legion is undeniably the clearest regional threat. They seek to turn the Mojave into something else, and there's a good chance you'll end up on the wrong side of that cross. Yet, the NCR, House, and many other smaller scale factions add balance. You're not just waiting on some plot-armored goofball to take a break from getting banned from the casinos to deal with the problems. There is active struggle between power players. Somehow, it benefits from being a war zone. We have a similar situation in the Commonwealth. The Institute is a nightmarish threat that not only harms people physically, but deteriorates the fabric of the existing society due to the synth paranoia they're largely responsible for. But you have the Brotherhood eventually making their way in to balance the scales. Neither of them are ideal winners of that war, but they fight each other. Then you have the Minutemen and the Railroad, as annoying as they are, still combating the Institute at all costs. The broader point with both of these wastes is that despite their great threats, you as an individual actor aren't left to try and outweight, or even worse, try and fight these entities, just hoping some sort of chosen one comes to save the day. For this reason, surprisingly, the belt actually stays in the top 3. The Midwest has real threats from the Raider groups, Super Mutant Army, and of course, the Calculator's Robot Army. The odds are against you, but the Brotherhood is not. Usually. Most of the time. The Midwest chapter is far from perfect, but they're much better than your problems. Better yet, they're also very capable of dealing with those problems, and they're not distracted by goofing around with a ton of random side quests. These guys are actively marching across the wastes and eliminating the regional threats one by one. The capital Wasteland belongs in 4th because the Enclave is once again trying to cleanse the wastes of your life, but once again, you have the Brotherhood on your side. I debated between this Wasteland and the Belt for 3rd and 4th, but while Lion's Brotherhood is perhaps the best morally, they are not nearly as capable as the Midwest. Like, not even close. Liberty Prime is great when you're trying to fight a war, but he doesn't do much outside of that. Governance is a different task altogether, and this relatively small chapter, made even smaller with the Outcasts splitting off, takes it down a notch. We also know that once Leather Coat Guy takes over, they stop caring about civilians a lot. The second worst wasteland in this category is Southern New California. The Master and his army are coming, and the Brotherhood rule here is very different. They're isolated and incredibly cautious. Without the right motivation, they will sit by while the wasteland falls to the Master's unity. They're happy to leave you to your own devices and deal with the regional threat, and your devices are lacking when compared to the super mutants. The only reason it's not lower is because the Enclave during the relevant time in northern New California is arguably the greatest threat the Wasteland has ever dealt with and facing the most limited opposition relatively. Their goal is genocide, and they are by far and away technologically superior to every other relevant force, including the Brotherhood. You are waiting on some chosen one to finally show up and start dealing with them, and in the meantime, they are present and killing people. Remember how I said the Mojave oddly benefits from being a war zone? Well, this is the alternative. When you don't have any counterbalance, it's just like shooting fish in a barrel for a group like the Enclave. Long-term future, our last category, the absolute undeniable winner, go ahead and fight me on it please, is Northern New California. Things are about to get much better here after the Enclave is dealt with. If you can make it to this point, you're about to witness the NCR become the first legitimate nation in the New World. The next 40 years are probably going to be the best 40 years any wasteland ever experiences. A GEC is going to benefit northern areas and combat that drought. Civilization will be tied together even more than it was already under a uniting banner. Law will be established. Raiders and external threats will exist, but in a far more limited form. Sure, there are some drawbacks, but only a goofball would argue that the negatives outweigh the positives here. Southern New California also has a solid follow-up, putting it into second place. This checks out with our earlier logic because Northern New California in its time and setting is the best when it comes to settlement and economy. Well, Southern New California is headed in a very similar direction after its events. The truth is it will be far too long before you see the true heights of the NCR if you choose this location, but it's a better alternative to the rest. Settlements will largely progress after the fall of the Master. Shady Sands will grow as the seed of the NCR, and society will pull together and progress in a way most wastelands never do. In third place, the Belt. I know, a rare sight to see it this high on a list, but here it is. Initially, it's rough, but after the Calculator is defeated and the Brotherhood gains proper control over the region, things can really take off here. The main issue with this wasteland and the rest is we don't know exactly what happens. The Calculator is likely taken out along with the Super Mutant Army and the Raider factions, but given this is the second earliest setting in our timeline, none of the more extreme potential futures seem likely for better or for worse. That could be a genocidal robot army or a grand Brotherhood empire, but both would have been noticed and discussed elsewhere in the future, so a humbler but a relatively stable region under Midwest Brotherhood rule for some decent length of time seems to be the most likely. Agricultural systems will be established, towns will be developed and linked together, and life could be decent for some time. Uncertainty with a rough idea of the future is to this region's relative benefit. I place the Mojave in fourth with confusion. This one is... I don't even know where to take this, because we don't know what happens to the Mojave. Say it with me now, say it with me. We don't know what happens to the Mojave. Will the Legion win? The NCR, House, a mailman, and a yes man? The Mojave is tough because Mr. House and the NCR are likely the ideal scenarios for the average person, but that's only half the battle. You also have dozens of smaller outcomes that could affect the region even with those two options. The other issue is that without intervention, the Legion appears to be quite the threat. The NCR has stretched itself thin and is far from home in California. House requires a physical hand or two. The potential for Vegas to end up as Caesar's new Rome seems uncomfortably high at times. This likely won't bode well for us. We know bits and pieces of Caesar's vision, but he also might not be the one in power when they roll through, and he won't be the one in power much longer anyway. What if he crawls in House's life chamber? I haven't thought about that. So life could shake out pretty well here, but it could also be horrendous and short. Or horrendous and long. Maybe the tunnelers will ruin everyone's plans, though I think that threat is a bit overstated, to be honest. Do we really trust this guy that much? Like, what does he know? For a similar reason, the Commonwealth is in fifth place, though for quite a few reasons, it's much worse despite only being separated by one spot. First of all, its starting point is worse. New Vegas could maintain roughly where it is and still be a much better place to live than an improved Commonwealth. Second, the Institute winning is a very frightening outcome. They could experiment with the surface, leave them alone for a bit, continue to prod them, or just wipe them out. Maybe bit by bit, they slowly replace everyone as a part of some experiment where you're the last non-synth, and then you begin to realize that there are no more humans left. Third, the Brotherhood of Steel on the East Coast is almost certainly worse than the NCR. Finally, if both of those factions are somehow defeated, the Minutemen and the Railroad are hardly promising. The gunners that whooped the Minutemen previously are still potentially at large here. The region is in complete disarray and requires so much repair that you not only need ideal results from the faction war, but you also need rapid development following that war from sources that were unable to provide it in the past. Finally, in last place with the most unclear future is the capital Wasteland. Consider for a moment the broader regional goal, only being focused on by a relatively small portion of people, is getting clean water. Most of the other wastelands are not in anywhere near as bad of a state, but this is achieved. They do it, they beat the Enclave, and they get Project Purity up and running, purifying the tidal basin near the Jefferson Memorial, and then they have a ton of pure water. Now what? They've essentially reached that baseline most other wastelands already were, maybe a bit better in that regard. You still have an enormous slaver issue, super mutants, raiders, no actual functional road network, no broader governments or city connectivity. Hopefully Canterbury continues to bring the region together through a little bit of trade, but this place has so little going for it to begin with that shaking off the apocalyptic level problems just reveals to this region that these guys are still living in a world that looks like the bombs just dropped a decade ago. The real struggle for them is just getting started. It can't be anywhere but last place in terms of a future. It has a bit of momentum, but that's about it. Okay, now we've completed our report. Let's see the results on which is the best and worst wasteland to live in. In first place, the best place to live, based on our categories, with only 18 points, is the Mojave. In an incredibly close second place, with only 19 points, 1 point more, we have Northern New California. In the middle, we also have a 1 point difference between third and fourth place, but the Commonwealth edges it out with 22 points, and Southern New California lands in fourth with 24 points. Somehow staying off the bottom as the second worst wasteland to live in is the Capital Wasteland with a sizable 29 points. And finally, the greatest failure, the worst wasteland to live in, the biggest disappointment to its parents, the place to avoid, the Midwest, also known as the Belt, with a whopping 35 points against it. Let's discuss. Okay, I'm gonna keep it 100 with you on a gut call. I actually disagree with this outcome. I stuck to the methods cleanly, but I would have given the edge to Northern New California over the Mojave. The aspect that swung the two was roads and travel along with factions and regional threat. I do stand by both of these though. They actually tie together. If you've played Fallout 2, wandering around in the wastes between settlements is not safe or reliable, and one of the worst things you can run into is an Enclave death squad being the regional threat. There's nuance here. I understand some people will feel like Fallout 2 has roads, they're just not functional or relevant to the game experience, but we're mixing the two in this discussion, leaning more on what we can actually see. Keep that in mind, leaning more on what we can see. That doesn't mean we discount anything we can't see. On the faction side of things, I struggled with this a bit because the Legion destroys Nipton, Searchlight, and Nelson. Thing is, our scenario drops you in at the start of each game. Those locations have already been sacked, and any further regional damage is done in the future, which is a category the Mojave did poorly in, and Northern New California did the best in. I have no issue with the Belt losing, like at all, not even a little bit, even to the Capital Wasteland. I know most people probably came in expecting the Capital to be the worst, but if you've played Tactics, you probably knew better. There's even some areas you could argue this place should have done worse. Just to give you some context, because I know even out of the earlier games, this is one that isn't played as much, the entire game is about you leading a squad of Brotherhood soldiers through a ton of locations and doing almost nothing but fighting. There's very little dialogue and tactics compared to the other games. When it happens, it's largely just people talking at you, so the core of this game is built around fighting. This naturally lends to a much more hostile environment. If you want to exclude the Belt because it's such a different setting and presentation, the Capital Wasteland is still a secure last place. While I was doing this, I noticed that Wastelands were pairing off into groups of two. The Mojave in northern New California are very similar. The capital Wasteland and the Belt share a lot in common, but then southern New California and the Commonwealth are together in the middle, but they're almost opposites. Southern NC is a limited option because it's just too early on in the timeline. It's a baseline for the rest of the Western settings to build upon. It just wouldn't make sense for them to go entirely backwards and behind where the setting starts. The Commonwealth has the opposite issue where it's the latest in the timeline but has so much chaos stacked on top of it that the weight of those problems holds it down. Given that, along with the long-term upside, Southern NC seems like it should be in third place over the Commonwealth, but I'll leave that for you to fight over. There's also the elephant in the room. I know I didn't talk about the one wasteland I know many of you are dying to hear about, the mountainous, strange, and rural wasteland full of mines, cults, and mutants. That is, of course, the Texas Wasteland. What do you want me to say? It's the best. It's way better than all the ones we talked about. Go to the Texas Wasteland, do it up. I'll see you in Carbon. Anyways, good luck out there. Try not to die. God bless America, and God bless the Enclave.